We've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. Wildfires burn more than 5,000 acres in the West. More intense and powerful hurricanes pummel states across the Gulf Coast. Historic floods, severe droughts have ravaged the Midwest. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones.
We're putting 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution up into the sky every day.
Climate change is disproportionately affecting people who can't afford it.
Climate change impacts every aspect of the geostrategic environment. It actually drives insecurity globally.
The biggest obstacle we have in tackling the climate crisis is our will to do it. We have the technologies, we have the expertise, we have the scientific backing. What we need is the conviction.
What we can do to help is to get engaged, to make our voices heard.
We need to make sure that we invest in our country and in the future technologies that we know will make us successful.
It's really important over the next 10 years that we disproportionately act as if our life depended on it, because in many ways it does.
We will work to come together here in our country and around the world to build and protect our common home for generations to come.
Welcome to Action Planet, Meeting the Climate Challenge. I'm Zinhle Essamuah with NowThis. In honor of Earth Day, we have partnered with Discovery Plus to examine the urgency of addressing climate change and its impact on our daily lives. With the planet's temperatures on the rise, there is a renewed urgency across public and private sectors to address the challenge of climate change.
Rejoin the Paris.
On his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order declaring the climate crisis a priority for his administration.
I, Deb Haaland, do solemnly swear.
He's chosen cabinet secretaries with long-standing careers working on climate issues and appointed the first White House climate advisor.
We know enough about climate solutions that they can be cheaper, we can be smarter, we can grow jobs by implementing them.
Tonight, we will speak directly to Vice President Kamala Harris about why the Biden-Harris administration has made addressing climate change a top priority. We will examine how outdated modes of producing energy disproportionately impact low-wealth communities and people of color, how land erosion and rising sea levels pose a threat to our national security. And we'll look at how renewable energy is on the rise in the #1 coal-producing state. We will begin by looking at how climate change impacts public health and discuss whether a once-in-a-century pandemic, like COVID-19, may become more frequent if we don't slow Earth's rising temperatures.
China is trying to contain an outbreak of the coronavirus.
The World Health Organization has now officially declared a pandemic.
We've seen a number of governments closing their borders.
12 confirmed cases in the U.S., more than 28,000 worldwide.
We will see more cases and things will get worse.
For the past year, the world has been brought together by a devastating pandemic that has taken the lives of nearly 3 million people. In the U.S. alone, we have lost more than 500,000 lives. Experts predict that the impact of COVID-19 will be felt for decades to come. New York City was an early epicenter of the pandemic. The first case was announced February 29, 2020, and by the beginning of April, the hospitals were overrun.
The moment that we realized that things were changing significantly was, I think, around mid to late March. It was almost like night and day. You walked in the day before and everything seemed to like, okay, and then it came.
22-year ER veteran Dr. Deborah White works in the Montefiore healthcare system in the hard-hit Bronx. By the end of March 2020, they had 650 COVID-19 patients.
People would be scared to be walking past you because I'd be in my scrubs. And, obviously that means I'm working with people who have COVID.
Dr. Michael Doherty was in his 3rd year of residency in Coney Island when the pandemic struck.
This entire driveway filled with ambulances backed up, with a couple of ambulances parked on the sidewalk. And some ambulances actually had to pull the patients out and take them up the ramp.
COVID-19 was not a black swan. It was predicted. It was well known that we were facing this risk. It wasn't a question if, it was a question when.
Climate experts around the world are raising concerns about the impact of reckless environmental policies and public health.
Burning fossil fuels is leading to the early death of 300,000 Americans every year and 8 million people around the world. That's 1 in 5 people are dying because of our reliance on fossil fuels. COVID-19 is like a sneak preview of what we expect to see more of with climate change in the healthcare setting.
You couldn't get through a shift without somebody needing to be intubated or somebody's heart had stopped. It wasn't that there was just one code per shift. It was that there was one code every 10 minutes. It felt like we weren't even able to finish stabilizing someone before we had to move on to resuscitating another patient. Could feel a little bit hopeless at times.
Burnout among medical providers was already a huge problem before COVID happened. And then COVID happened, and we saw healthcare workers stretched to the absolute brink.
Both of my parents became ill. They contracted COVID. They were both admitted to the ICU. My father was really struggling to breathe. My sister sat down on that ledge and she was crying because she couldn't believe what was happening. I had to try to explain to her that things weren't going to go well. And later that evening, we made the decision, my sister and I, they turned off the ventilator and we just kind of let him go. But I had this feeling that I couldn't stop because that's not what my father would have expected. I was back at work at 8 and I started the routine all over. And I really, I did it for my parents. My mom was still in the ICU. At one point we thought we were gonna lose both of them, but I think he left so my mom could stay.
We're playing an ill-fated game of Russian roulette with nature right now.
Infectious diseases are climbing latitude by latitude, just as ecosystems are changing.
We have pandemics on the scale of COVID-19 caused by diseases like malaria every year. Dengue infects 96 million people every year and has been increasing exponentially on every continent except Antarctica. In some of the US states like Florida, Georgia, Texas, we've even seen local cases of transmission of dengue and Zika. And as the climate becomes more suitable for these mosquitoes, it's going to become a much bigger and more expensive problem.
Climate change matters to the health of everyone in the United States because every aspect of our health depends upon a stable climate. Even small differences in air pollution can lead to really higher risks of dying from COVID-19. And it's not just COVID-19, it's influenza and other respiratory infections.
And we live in this hyper-connected, globalized world where one disaster in one little corner of the planet can spill over.
Some of our work shows that in the Brazilian Amazon, as you cut down forest, each square kilometer of forest loss can lead to about 6 additional cases of malaria transmission. Environmental policy needs to account for the human health costs when we change ecosystems.
The reality is, pandemic prevention acts are climate solutions. We have to do both, and we can do both.
This is the decade when we not only have to cut global emissions by half, but we have to halt the destruction of nature to stand a chance of avoiding irreversible changes beyond this decade that we cannot turn around. We are at an urgency point.
It's impossible to talk about the climate crisis without acknowledging communities of color, lower wealth communities, and indigenous people who have been disproportionately impacted. They have borne the brunt of this ongoing crisis due to a history of systemic racism that exposed these communities to toxins and disease. But now, there is a new push for environmental justice coming from the highest levels of government and grassroots organizers around the country.
South Memphis is a predominantly black community. This is a remarkable place. Right here, there's a small community called Boxtown, the oldest African-American black community in Memphis. The folks are descendants of formerly enslaved people who, post-emancipation, built Boxtown. It gets its name because the people used some of the materials from boxcars that were near the railway station to actually build their homes. And so they're carrying the history of freedmen and freed women literally in their DNA. There's a responsibility to protect this community. And there's a deep level of concern about what's happening.
Justin J. Pearson is a 27-year-old activist with deep ties to South Memphis.
Hey, you can kind of smell it. Yeah, the smell changed, didn't it? Right? Like now, imagine coming to school some days and it's smelling like this. And you're just trying to figure out, what is that? Like, is that sewage? Like, what is it? But no, it's these stackers. It's like the dirtiest part of the after smell of a match going out. We would go to my grandmother's houses every Sunday after church. You drive up off the exit, and there are these pillows of smoke. And as a kid, I was fascinated by it. And it wasn't until relatively recently, I would say, that I began to understand that the folks who breathe that air, right, that's us. What we get to greet us is not a welcome to Southwest Memphis sign. What we get are these toxins, these billows of smoke and chemicals that are literally killing us.
Over the years, South Memphis has seen industrial factories encroach upon its borders. Today, there are 29 toxic facilities releasing chemicals into the air.
In the South Memphis area, we do see a disproportionate amount of pneumonias, bronchitis, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and air pollution is probably the largest environmental factor in those diseases.
When I was growing up, there was a place, there was a chemical factory over there, and we lived around it. And so many of the people around that area developed breast cancer on the same street, on the same block.
A whole lot of people in this area had
got sick and died. They pretend they didn't know what was wrong with them.
This is my dad, Miller T. Nicholson. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2010.
There is something systematically going on that is killing us. You redline black folks into a particular community where toxins are being pumped into the air. And the consequences are in the death rate, are in the cancer rates, are in the asthma rates of our community. The folks in these communities are the ones who bear the burden of environmental racism. They bear the burden of economic injustice. They bear these burdens, and they're screaming. That is a perpetuation of injustice that has happened in this place called America and Southwest Memphis for far too long.
Environmental injustices look like Cancer Alley between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where we have these cancer clusters where communities who were freed from slavery founded their own communities, and then petrochemical facilities began to surround them, to pollute them, to take away their hope and their possibilities for a better future.
Now there is a threat coming not just from the air, but from the ground below. There is a proposal to build the Byhalia pipeline, a 45-mile crude oil pipeline which would run through South Memphis on top of the city's main source of clean drinking water.
The pipeline is going to go through here about 100 yards that way. We are standing next to a feeder well, and this pump is pulling water up from the Memphis Sand Aquifer, which is about 300 or 400 feet below here. And that's the pristine, good water. It's pre-industrial, pre-plastic, no PFAS in it. It's just good, pure water, which is why we like to keep it that way.
Ward Archer is one of the many grassroots activists fighting to protect the water supply for residents of South Memphis.
Anybody who thinks a pipeline doesn't leak is living in a dream world.
So this red line is the proposed Byhalia pipeline. These are people's homes, and the pipeline is almost adjacent to it.
You know, I didn't realize it was that close.
As long as Westwood and Boxtown are the ones carrying the risk of this, it's okay. But when it was Collierville or Germantown, no, they said, no, we can't do those routes.
And why?
You know why. You know why. It's racial and it's economic. There was a community meeting that Byhalia Pipeline held, and they were asked by one of the members of the community, why did you all choose this route? And there's usually a PR answer, but instead the representative was pretty clear and plain. What did he say? We basically chose a point of least resistance. When people aren't scripted, you can really learn what they believe and what they think. But they didn't check the boxes of resilience. They didn't check the boxes of courage of the people in the community. And so now that point and path of least resistance is one of the most significant points of resilience and, in some ways, revolution that's happening in our country.
No more oil in our soil. Do not come and bamboozle our people.
This pipeline will be a bomb for us in this neighborhood.
I'd like to meet you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate what you all are doing.
Yes, sir.
Who's taking the picture?
Vice President and environmental activist Al Gore has taken an interest in the movement, attending the rally put on by the Memphis community against the pipeline.
I know the water is good. I'm almost 70 years old. And I remember the water coming out of the ground. We had an old pump. And that water would come out of the ground so cold and good. We didn't have a whole lot, but we had everything.
If anybody is ever tempted to feel like we don't have the ability, that you don't have the ability as a community to win this battle, you just remember that political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you. Keep up the fight.
These polluting companies have learned how to use their money and political power to serve their interests instead of the public interest. And the only way to counter that is to have many more people at the grassroots level speaking up and speaking out.
Dr. King, when he was convincing folks to come to Memphis for the sanitation workers' strike, said this: the movement lives or dies in Memphis.
The environmental justice movement continues to grow and expand. People are also saying that we can win on the climate crisis if we come together and we center racial justice and environmental justice issues. This is a moment when we can bring hope back to communities, where we can reinvest in communities. We have a chance to move people from surviving to thriving. We have a chance for a new day.
Over the past century, climate change has caused rising sea levels, an increased frequency of wildfires and droughts, and extreme weather events throughout the world. Human activity is literally changing our atmospheric environment. It's now predicted that just a slight increase in global temperatures will trigger mass migration of those living in the most vulnerable areas of the globe. This is not a faraway problem. It's happening in our own backyards. Southeast Louisiana is one of the regions most at risk in the world to climate change. Here, land disappears at the rate of 1 football field per hour.
It's real easy to take for granted where you come from. This island is not only just a place where we live, but it's a place where whenever the world was finished with you, whenever the world didn't want you around them, this place was home.
Ile de Jean Charles is a community in coastal Louisiana, as coastal as you can get. It is populated and has been populated predominantly by Native Americans. They have been there for nearly 200 years.
I've lived here my whole life. I am a Choctaw Indian. My family has been over here. It would go back to at least 5 generations. Right now, I'm living with my niece and nephew.
From me growing up till now, there's actually a lot that has changed, and that's not even a long time period.
They had a thriving community on the island that has essentially been destroyed. They have lost some 98% of the landmass of the island just in the last 70 to 80 years.
Ile de Jean Charles is in this unique area in southeastern Louisiana where the subsidence rates are astronomically high, making it, one of the probably the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. The land in some areas is sinking up to 1 inch or even 2 inches a year. And it's related to the oil and gas extraction, water extraction, and the lack of sediment from the Mississippi River.
All this water you're seeing right here, at one point, was actually not here at all. It was actually just farmland.
And that road that y'all drove down here on, that really long strip, there used to be actually land on both sides, like green grass on both sides of it.
With less land, more water, hurricanes became more powerful.
Each hurricane season accelerated the deterioration of the island, leaving residents to constantly consider whether to stay or go.
It's evident now that the island is not going to be able to be a viable community for much longer.
I think we can safely say the land is not coming back. So you either figure out a way to live over the water or you retreat inland. Those really are the options.
This isn't something that's unique to the United States. There are examples of this throughout the world.
Sheta Chakraborty is a risk and behavioral scientist who specializes in climate change.
Because the planet is warming. You are dealing with water insecurity. You're dealing with lands that can't be farmed. And so because of that, you're seeing migrations of people looking for better opportunities for their families.
What we really need to do is recognize that climate is a threat to people. People have indeed caused part of the problem, but people are being impacted by it. And so it shouldn't any longer be about who's causing it, but how we get out of this.
In 2016, after nearly 20 years of organizing, the residents of Ile de Jean Charles won a $48.3 million HUD grant to resettle the entire community. Tribe members chose a property option furthest from the coast, 40 miles inland and the least likely to ever flood. Pat Forbes oversees the relocation project.
The residents of Ile de Jean Charles were able to decide whether they want to come or not. Most of the folks have decided that they're going to move here and have a new home. We're moving some 40 to 50 families and spending close to $50 million to do that. That's not an economically replicable approach to resettlement. To think of moving a community like Miami or New Orleans, it's a staggering thought.
I'll be honest with you, I don't like that fact that climate change is in some kind of way forcing me to live somewhere else. I really don't want to go. But for me, it's not the answer to what's going on. It is just a response to what's going on.
Whoa. One of the most challenging steps in the process is having people come to grips with the fact that they have to leave their homes.
And it still has a porch, and we still have a screened-in back porch.
They have like a garage for the car or whatever?
It's not a garage, it's a carport, yeah.
Not only you, but your parents and grandparents had grown up there, and then you were told that that place was not going to be livable anymore. It's a hard thing to do.
Nobody really wants to leave home, but, you know, sometimes you have to, and...
You shouldn't have to, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing you can do. The land's leaving. There's nothing we could do. The water don't stop.
This is an important project within the context of where we're all going in the next 50 years. So while it's maybe the first, it's certainly not the last.
Climate change really just amplifies every national security threat that we already have on our radar. So many different things that the Department of Defense in the US is concerned about is being made that much worse because of this new hostility of the environment that we're having to contend with.
You see already today a world that has great difficulties in handling migration across borders, if it's work-related migration or conflict-related migration. So add to that climate refugees, and you can just see what an enormous challenge this is.
What's so powerful about the moment now is that, you know, for many, many years, for decades, we talked about climate change as something that was going to happen in the future. Well, now we've seen community after community across the United States, whether it's wildfires, whether it's drought, whether it's incredible storms, that is happening now. And so more and more people understand, people feel the impacts of climate change in their lives today. That's creating a greater sense of urgency.
What brings me the most hope is that while the federal government was absent in the prior administration, I think we have a lot of opportunities that President Biden's put on the table for significant reductions by investing in clean energy and infrastructure. We have a ton of solutions that can get us where we need to go over the next 10 years, and then we can invest in more. Then change can happen.
My uncle is making a sacrifice because, I mean, if it wasn't for us, he definitely wouldn't move. He would just stay here.
He'll stay here until there's nothing left of that house.
Yeah.
If he could.
Yeah. No matter where they move us, no matter what state, what country, this is always going to be home.
Since the Industrial Revolution, coal has been the dominant source of energy in the United States. Generations of workers took pride in providing power to America. Though coal's best days are long over, reliance on fossil fuels is still the primary contributor to global warming and the climate crisis. And coal-rich states like Wyoming are faced with a reckoning: how to pivot to a clean, renewable future, while many hold on to the last vestiges of its past.
There's at least a dozen coal mines that I know of in Gillette. It's safe to say, if you live in Gillette, you're gonna run into a coal miner every day. Okay. Right in front of me, see the two silos? That's where I worked.
Lynn Huskinson was a coal miner for 39 years.
What coal means to this town is it's their livelihood. It pays their mortgage, provides a nice life.
But as demand for coal has declined, so have the jobs. And Lynn has been unemployed for 2 years.
People expected that paycheck and didn't get that paycheck. It was a bad situation. Do you miss this work? Oh, I miss it. I miss running equipment. I miss building a road. I miss loading a truck. But you can't make people buy coal.
If there's ever a time when the last coal train leaves the station, I think that'll happen in Wyoming. Coal is declining. It's unavoidable by cheaper forms of energy production that are available now. It's already started with natural gas. It'll continue with renewables. We need to accept that and start planning for a transition.
Across the state, in a region ironically named Carbon County, that transition started in the 1980s.
There used to be several different coal mines in this area that have since closed. It's nice to see that we can reuse the land. You know, the wind kind of funnels through here, and that's why it's such a good place for wind energy.
Lane Anderson is the director of wind operations for a large electric power company. His career has mirrored Wyoming's shift from fossil fuels.
When I was going to school in the early 80s there, that was the thing to do, was be a petroleum engineer. We had roughly 150 kids or more in my class alone. Around 2008, wind started picking up. And that's when I decided, you know, let me try this for a little bit. There's over 1,000 turbines under my direction, over 2,240 megawatts. The large transmission line that we just built is a 500 kV transmission line to pump all this new wind energy out of Wyoming. Goes into Utah, Idaho, over to Washington, Oregon. Wyoming is around 14th or 15th in the nation on the energy it produces from the wind. But we do have the resources to become a top producer, I think.
As fossil fuels ramp down, the potential for renewable energy is awesome. It's immense. The real question is one of choice.
While the economy is shifting and clean energy is getting much more prominent, there are benefits and there are challenges.
There's some resistance to wind energy and green energy, if you will. A lot of the people that worked in the extraction business, they look at it as a competitor. How you doing, Daryl?
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
How are you?
Good.
The Republican mayor of Rawlins, Wyoming, is a champion for renewable energy.
10 years ago is when things were the toughest. That's when we lost our coal miners. The oil field had slowed down a little bit. We had a lot of empty stores. It was kind of a blighted area.
The small city will soon be the home of the largest wind farm in America.
My personal belief is it provides money, it provides jobs, taxes. When I look at a wind farm, all I think about is cha-ching. And then I look at the towns that they're by and just think of what people have that they wouldn't have had. A lot of infrastructure, police cars, those kind of things. Some things are not quantifiable. Whether we're better off or not better off because of wind energy, that is quantifiable.
A clean energy economy, it equals jobs, thousands and thousands of jobs. It's taking advantage of our natural resources, building the infrastructure around those natural resources.
As a nation, we have watched other countries, the countries that have invested in the technologies that will help them to get to their goal of net zero carbon emissions, have been creating jobs hand over fist in those industries, good paying jobs. So we just have to be fearless, I think, about investing in our nation. It is a once in a century opportunity to say, we're gonna invest in the future.
And the future is windmills, it is solar, it's electric mobility, it's battery factories.
The auto industry has begun to embrace the shift to electric vehicles, with companies like GM pledging to make only electric vehicles by 2035.
Picture a scenario where you come home from work, you tell your vehicle to be charged by 8 o'clock in the morning, using power that is abundant and cheap from wind turbines, and we see a path to get there. It really is about bringing everybody along with us.
I know we're going to win. I know we're going to end up with a fossil fuel-free world economy run on solar and wind.
The transition in the end has to be built on what the future has to look like. And that future has to include everybody, no worker or community left behind. And I think that's a much better framing than picking yesterday's energy and thinking that it's going to be tomorrow's future. We have to create tomorrow's future, and it has to be based on our values and our science, and that's what this is all about.
%90 of America's school buses currently run on diesel, but that's changing because of an ambitious plan to put America on a path toward 100% electric school buses. One of the companies leading that change is Thomas Built Buses, based in High Point, North Carolina. Vice President Kamala Harris visited the plant this week to talk about the American Jobs Plan and how that investment in EV buses means new jobs and a cleaner future for children. I spoke to the Vice President during her tour of the facility. Hello, Vice President Harris. Thank you for your time.
It's good to be with you.
We are in North Carolina. You're standing in front of a school bus.
Yes.
Why here? Why now?
25 million of our children a day go to school on the school bus, and the vast majority of them are diesel. So you're talking about toxic fumes, you're talking about real health considerations for the children. But what we're doing here is we're watching innovation at work. It's going to have an impact on the public health of our country, in particular our children's health. It's going to have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm very excited to be here and to highlight this as an example of what we are capable of as a country.
I want to focus on climate beyond the American Jobs Plan. And I know even in your first month in office, President Biden signed a slew of executive orders, including bringing the U.S. back into the Paris Climate Accord. But what policies outside of the American Jobs Plan and what we've seen can we see on the agenda when it comes to climate-forward legislation?
Well, one of the other areas I've focused on for quite some time is water. And the way I talk about it is, for a number of perspectives, one including, if you just think about it in the context of national security. Some people say, what, that's a big leap? Well, no. In a short matter of time, wars will be fought over water. It is a precious resource that we as human beings rely on to live. And it is in diminishing supply because of the climate crisis and because of what we are seeing around the country and around the world. Extreme drought, which causes people to move from the place where they lived and where their grandparents lived and the language they know and the cultures they know, because they need to go where they can grow food and eat food. As a daughter of California, as a child who grew up with drought, I see the effects. I know the effects of not focusing on this as a priority. And so what am I looking at? What we can do to diversify water policy. Let's diversify water policy. Let's put equal attention into what we need to do around capture of water, storage of water, in particular underground, recycling, of course, conservation, desalination. You know, take advantage of our ability to understand a precious resource that may be in short supply.
The grim reality is that the climate crisis impacts communities of color first.
So let us have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it does. And if you look at it in terms of who, for example, is living in the poorest air quality districts in our country, predominantly black and brown people. Poor people, people of color, black and brown people, have the right that everyone has to be able to drink clean water and breathe clean air. And that's why the work that I will continue to do with so many of our colleagues, and our administration cares deeply about this, around environmental justice, is real work that must happen. Let's understand this is about equal justice, it is about equity, it is about public health. It captures so many issues that must be priority for all of us.
I want to end on a personal note, because I know you have a family.
Yes.
And you've said that some of your most lively conversations with your kids have been around sustainability.
Yes.
So I wonder what kind of America and planet you hope they will inherit and your children's children will inherit.
That's such a wonderful point. I want that our children, the children in my family, the children of our community, the children of our world, that they can take certain things for granted. They should be able to take for granted that they will have clean drinking water. Take for granted that they can breathe the air and not become sick, not contract asthma, lung disease. Take for granted that they will grow up in a world where we invested in skills development, in job creation. That's what I want.
Well, thank you so much, Vice President, for your time.
Thank you.
Climate change is the greatest collective challenge we face as a human family. The crisis is urgent, but environmental activists, climate scientists, business leaders, and lawmakers are all working to find ways to meet the crisis head on. There is no alternative. Now is the time to act.